Hi and welcome to this video in the QPSMR Companion Up and Running series. And in this video we're going to give you a tour of QPSMR Companion just to sort of show you the basic functionality and sort of take you through the steps you would go through to run a project from start to finish in QPSMR Companion. We're also going to cover some of the terminology that you should become acquainted with when using QPSMR Companion. If you're looking at how to use the software itself, there's another video which takes you from end to end in QPSMR Companion in about 20 minutes. So that's probably the video for you if you want to find out more about how you actually use it and put questions in and produce tables. So let's get started. So let's first of all talk about what QPSMR Companion does, and the three things I guess that you can break it down into are setting up your questionnaire, entering or collecting some data, and thirdly doing some analysis on that data. And those three phases are reflected in the menus, if you like, that you're going to see in QPSMR Companion. So let's walk you around a project that already exists and just show you some of the things that you can do, and again acquaint you with the terminology that's used within QPSMR Companion. So you can see on the screen here I've got a project that's already open. I'm just going to widen that slightly so I can see it better, and you'll see that all the questions here have names. So for example, there's a postcode here, there's a member question, and then we get into the body of the questionnaire where it runs down from question 1 right down to question 13 here. So a reasonable length questionnaire with 13 questions and maybe some demographics in here as well. So each of these questions, as you see down the left hand side here, has a name, and here's the text associated with each of those questions. So let's talk first of all about how QPS actually works behind the scenes. What's actually going on here? So to prepare this questionnaire, someone's sat here and entered the definitions of each of these questions. So if we pick on question here, event, so we click on the event question, and you can see there's a question called event, and its text is whether they attended an event, and it's got a yes no answer to it. Let's dive a little bit further down now, look at another entry in here. Let's pick on Q4_A, and you can see here we've got a question where they're rating good transportation, and they're giving it 5 possible answers, very good to very poor, with a 6 that's don't know, not stated, and a score's been applied here of 2, 1, 0, -1 and -2. So there's a question that is part of a rating scale, and you can see if we look at the questionnaire here, we've got some more ratings down here as we go through ease of booking tickets and so on, down for 7 rating statements within that rating scale. So this is how we manage this questionnaire. This is sort of after, if you like, the questionnaire has been prepared. And it's important, I think, to understand what QPS is doing in terms of its data and what's sitting behind it. And the way that QPS works is that there's effectively 2 files of information which are kept separate. So this data here, or this information about the questionnaire here, you can see is held in a QDF file. So I called this project here demo.qdf, and the data is stored separately, if you like, in an external file. Now that external file may be an ASCII file, it could be a CSV file. QPS Companion now supports CSV files as a data input, which wasn't supported in the previous version of QPSMR Insight, so that's a little change there for people more familiar with Insight. And it can also store data in binary files, although binary files are becoming pretty redundant now and are fairly seldom used, and an old way, if you like, of storing data. They were invented to store multi-response data in an efficient way, whereas big ASCII files now are a perfectly acceptable way of storing big multi-response questions. So that's one thing that's going on. You've got your questionnaire here in the QDF. You've got your data sitting in an ASCII file. ASCII files and CSV files are a nice way of storing data because you can inspect them in other bits of software. So, for example, Notepad would open up a ASCII file for you, and Excel would open up a CSV file for you so you can see what's in each field there if you wanted to, completely outside of the QPSMR companion system. Now, one consideration that's important to think about is, and I'm going to go to the data menu here, is your data. If we look in here, in this data menu here, you'll see there's various options. I'm not going to go through all those at this stage here, but you can choose whether your data is either stored in a specific location, or you can leave QPS to decide where it's stored. Now, what does that mean? Well, what that means is that in most cases, I find you don't really care where QPS is storing your data. So if you've got a question on your questionnaire like gender, where code 1 means male and code 2 means female, for example, QPS will decide where to store that data in your ASCII file. So it will set up, if you like, a reference automatically to say that gender is perhaps stored in the 11th location in your data file, often referred to as column 11. So the 11th field from the left, if you like, and it's storing male as 1 and gender as 2 in that 11th or column 11 in that 11th location. Now, there are occasions where you want to choose where you store that data, and in such cases, you would want to make the program request from you where that data is stored. And there's not too many occasions where that becomes an issue. One of the issues might be where you're only preparing data for a client. So you're setting up a questionnaire. Your client has already said that they want gender to be in the 11th location, age in the 12th location, as codes 1, 2, 3, or whatever it might be. And as you're setting up your QDF or your questionnaire definition file in QPSMR Companion, you want to tell QPS to put the data for those particular questions wherever your client has defined. So that would be a reason for taking the control out of QPSMR Companion and storing it where it says. Another reason might be, although that's less of an issue, it might be something like a tracking study where you're always trying to store data in the same locations. And one of the tricks, if you like, that QPSMR has is that it allows you to store questions that are in a sequential order in a different sequential order in data. So you might have a questionnaire that goes question 1, 2, 3, 4, but perhaps at a later stage in a tracking study, question 3 disappears and perhaps 3 new questions are put in their place. And that would mean, in theory, that the sequential order of the data locations where the data is stored would be disturbed. Now, there's 2 or 3 ways that you can work with that in QPSMR Companion. You could either store those data in other locations that are spare at the end of the record, for example, which is what QPSMR would do by default. Or, of course, you could actually have reformat your data so that you output it to a separate file, pulled it back in, and it would make it all sequential for you. And on a big tracking study, that's probably a good way to go. So how you manage your data behind the scenes gives you a lot of choice in QPSMR, and that's something that, you know, that setting the locations or not is really your choice. All right, so let's cancel that off and let's have a look further at what we do when we insert questions within QPS. As I said, there's 3 distinct phases to QPSMR. There's the insert the questionnaire phase where you're setting up your questionnaire. There's a data stage where you're inputting your data or you're reading in your data if it's been prepared externally, and then an analysis phase when you're going to start to analyze that data. All right, so let's look at the insert menu here. And the first thing that you'll note is that there's 3 types of entries here. So these things down the left hand side of the screen here, which I've just covered, is are entries. They're not necessarily questions. You'll see here, these ones here have got Q's. These here with the three differently coloured circles are in fact filters and another type of entry. And this mauve symbol here is a variable. And that's reflected in the insert menu here, where you can see question entry, filter entry, and variable entry. So what's the difference between these three types of entry? Well, a question entry is perhaps most simple to explain. It's a question that's going to appear on your questionnaire, something that's either information as part of the questionnaire for an interviewer or a data entry person, or more likely or more commonly, a question you're actually going to ask somebody who is going to be completing that survey. So a question entry may be of different types. So it could be a single question. So if we click through on this, you'll see down here that there's a different types of questions that I could ask. So I could ask a single coded question where only one answer or no answer is appropriate, a multi-coded question where any number of answers are appropriate. So to give examples of those two types of response questions, a single coded question might be which gender, age group you fall into, how you rate something from very good to very poor, what region you come from, north, central or south. They're all single questions, whereas a multi-response question might be what's your favorite brand, where people can pick more than one brand, or which brands have you ever seen advertised, where people might pick one brand, but they also might pick several brands, or indeed no brand. So a multi-response allowed question means that anything goes. In other words, people can give no answer, one answer, or as many answers as they wish. And then we come to two numeric types of questions. Integer, where you're collecting a whole number. So if you ask somebody how many children they have, you would expect a whole number. Whereas there's occasions where you want a floating point value, where you might want to know how far someone's travelled, and you might want to collect that to one decimal place, in which case you want them to be able to answer 5.9 kilometres or something like that. And then moving down, you can see there's other types of questions that you can have. Character questions, where perhaps you want their email address, something like that. The date and time. Verbatim text, where you want a completely open question, where you want to collect exactly what they wish to say about something. So why did you say that? What reasons? For what reasons did you buy this product? And then you want to collect the information where they say because it's the best product on the market, or some answer like that. Or where there's actually no question at all, it's just an instruction to an interviewer. Perhaps they've got to read something out or explain something to a respondent if it's a face-to-face CAPI interview, or it might be an instruction to someone doing data entry. So there's different types of question entries that you can have. And if we just close that off, so let's go back to the insert menu, and all those things there come under the question entry menu. Now the next type of entry you'll see down here is a filter entry, and a filter entry is somewhat different. So that's where you want to select which people are going to ask or be asked your particular questions on your questionnaire. So for example, you may have a question on the questionnaire that you want to seek their opinion on brand X, for example, but you might only want to ask that question of people who have heard or bought brand X. So you would apply a filter to the question we asked them their opinions of brand X, and you would typically pick up that information from a previous question. So you may have asked at question 1, which brands have you bought? Brand A, B, C, D, up to X maybe. And then at a subsequent question, you want to ask them their opinions of brand X, but you only want to ask that question of people who chose brand X at that earlier question. So you would apply a filter to the question coming from the earlier question where they said they'd heard or bought brand X. So they're filter entries. And the third type of entry you can see on the list here is a variable entry. Now, a variable entry is not a question you're going to ask on your questionnaire. It's something that you're typically going to do or use in analysis, or perhaps sometimes to check data. So what's a variable entry? Well, a variable entry is something that you're pulling together from one or more other questions or indeed other variables. So let's take a simple example of that first of all. So you might ask somebody to give you their exact age, and let's say they answer that as 32. Then you want to put that age into some ranges when it comes to analysis. So you might want to band together 16 to 34, 35 to 54, and 55 plus into three convenient ranges. And of course, that variable for the person who was 32, you'd want them to go into the 16 to 34 category. So your variable would define those ranges that you'd want to put them into. Now, variables can be more complex than that. They can come from more than one question. So you could, for example, pick up people from age within gender. So you might want to pick up people who are male 16 to 34, female 16 to 34, male 35 plus, female 35 plus. So they're not questions you're going to ask on your questionnaire. It's a variable that you're going to pull data together from two or more questions. And they can be far more complex than that. Your variables can be grouping things together from any number of questions to provide you with complex analysis variables that you can use in tabulations and so on. And indeed, variables sometimes are used to check data. So you might want to check, for example, if you're collecting percentages, that the answers that someone gave to perhaps 4 or 5 questions added to 100%, so that you could check that at data collection stage. And if they didn't add to 100%, you could go back and re-question that or re-enter that data so that it did add to 100%. So there's variables used also at data collection. And variables can be defined from other variables. So to use that example of gender within age groups, I could build a variable on top of that that then picked up people based in the north of the country who were male 16 to 34 and picking up the male 16 to 34 from that defined variable. So variables from variables from variables is perfectly permissible in QPSMR Companion, and indeed you can use really complicated expressions using brackets, less than, greater than, grouping things together in quite complex ways for your analysis needs. So this is in fact the QDF that we produced on this project. It runs to 13 questions here. They've all been set up. All these entries have been set up by inserting either question entries, filter entries, or variable entries. Now, if you want to know more about how to do all those things, there are other videos that cover those things in great detail. Now, the next menu where I'm going to take a quick look is the answers menu. Now, this is a slight change for anybody who's come from QPSMR Insight. They'll be more familiar with the data menu, where everything to do with data management and data collection were within one menu item. In the companion, they're separate now, so the data menu now deals with updating data, merging data, weighting data, looking at data, exporting data to other formats, as you can see here. So if you wanted to export it to SPSS, for example, this is where you would go to do that. Whereas the answers menu is much more about testing your data entry and actually collecting that data and keying it in, or indeed setting up distributable files so that you can distribute your data entry to other people to enter data or collect data. And indeed, that's one thing that's quite important about QPSMR Companion, that you can freely distribute your project for data collection to as many people as you want to. And that's true both for using input on computers or using Android, so that interviewers out in the field can enter data using tablets, for example. So data collection is free, and it's free to distribute as long as you, of course, have a QPSMR Companion license. Next along here, we come to the CATI menu. Now that is only enabled if you have a CATI license. So QPSMR CATI used to be a separate product with it, for people who know Insight. It's now inside the companion, but you'll find this menu only enabled if you have a CATI license. It is an add-on that allows you to collect data for telephone interviewing in a centralized way, so that you have interviewers with headsets who can collect data, dial potential respondents, and collect their data over the telephone and have it all centralized on a server. We're not going to cover that here. I should say there's a separate set of videos on CATI that you can watch if you're interested in that, or you want to upgrade and use the CATI facilities. And then we come to the analysis features, and there's some new things here too. So one thing that's new in Companion that you didn't have in Insight is that you've got now a data drill down menu. And I'll quickly just take you into that just to give you a quick feel for that. So let's just save the project first and go into the data drill down menu. There's some settings I can set here. Pick up my data file, and I'm now ready to do some quick figures in the data drill down menu. So this is all about doing fast analysis so you can see what you've got. So I could quickly drag question 4A here, and you can see I've got a table out very quickly with 2 respondents in it. And if I wanted to, I could analyze that by whether they're a member or not. And you can see I've got a very quick cross analysis. Not a particularly interesting table with 2 people, but if I had 2,000 people in there, I would start to get some very meaningful figures. And I can add percentages to that so that I can see the data in a little bit more interesting way, and I can obviously get rid of the figures if I only want percentages. But this is a tool for quickly producing analyses. I can add more tables in here, and I can toggle between these different tables. And indeed, I could drag all of these in here to get some quick count. So this is a quick way of really quickly looking at your data and exploring it and seeing what data you've got in here before perhaps you go to doing full analysis. So that really completes this tour of QPSMR Companion. It's given you a flavor of what you can do. If we go to the next level up, you'll find that you can do really complex tables, really nice tables with banners, applying filters to those tables if you wish to. And indeed, there's a new facility in the Companion which allows you to do grid tables so that you can quickly produce a grid table that summarizes a grid on your questionnaire, or a series of ratings and statements, as some people refer to them as. So there's some really nice, powerful tools in there for analyzing your data as well. So this has given you a quick tour of the QPSMR Companion and a bit of an insight as to how it works. It's taking you through those stages of setting up a questionnaire, entering and collecting data, and analyzing that data. Of course, to get more details and to see that in action, I would commend you to the next video in the list, which is the one that takes you through QPSMR Companion from start to finish in about 20 minutes. And that really does sort of show you it in action, shows you what you've actually got to do to set up a questionnaire, enter some data, and produce some tables and some information from your survey. So there we are. Thank you for joining me. There's a whole series of videos on our website, qpsmrlearning.com. Please watch those videos. They really give you a real insight to many of the tricks and things that you can do. This video really is just an oversight to get you started. Thank you for joining me.